Okay, so are you ready to dive into some time travel?
Always up for a good temporal paradox or two. So yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Because this deep dive is going to take us to some pretty wild places. Telepathic messages from beyond the grave, post-apocalyptic showdowns, and,
Oh, don't forget everyone's favorite time-traveling teenager.
exactly, you know it. Speaking of which, I think that's a perfect place to start. We've got those Back to the Future excerpts, and honestly, I never get tired of that movie.
Right. It's a classic for a reason.
Totally. So, from your perspective, what is it about Back to the Future that still resonates with audiences after all these years? What's the magic ingredient?
Well, I think it's that perfect blend of humor, heart, and sci-fi spectacle. You've got the iconic DeLorean,
Oh, for sure.
the quirky characters, and a storyline that taps into those universal desires. Like, who hasn't wished they could go back and change something in their past or get a glimpse of what the future holds?
It's so true. And speaking of changing the past, one of the excerpts focuses on that moment when Marty almost erases himself from existence. Talk about high stakes.
Oh, absolutely. That scene always has me on the edge of my seat.
Right. Even after all these viewings, it's still so intense.
Mm-hmm.
And it really highlights those potential consequences of altering the past, even if you think you're doing the right thing.
For sure. It's a great way to visualize how even small changes can ripple outward and create these unforeseen consequences down the line. And, it's a perfect segue to those philosophical excerpts you mentioned, the ones that really dive deep into the whole time travel paradox thing.
Oh, yeah, those are fascinating. So, for those who haven't really gone down that rabbit hole, can you give us a quick breakdown of what makes time travel paradoxes so mind-bending?
Well, they essentially force us to confront the potential for contradictions in time travel. Like,
Mhm.
take the classic grandfather paradox, for example.
Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
So the ideal is, what if you went back in time and hypothetically, of course, prevented your grandfather from ever meeting your grandmother?
Okay, I'm already confused.
Right. It's a brain twister. Because on the one hand, if you were to say, erase your grandfather from history, you'd never have been born to go back in time in the first place.
Whoa. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yet there you are, standing face to face with him in the past. It creates this logical loop that seems impossible to resolve.
It's like trying to tie a knot in a piece of string that has no ends. It just doesn't quite compute.
Hmm.
So how does the essay even begin to untangle this? Do they have a flux capacitor up their sleeve?
Well, no DeLorean needed in this case. This essay, and I'm thinking it might be from David Lewis, just based on the writing style, really digs into the nature of possibility. And they use this interesting example to kind of illustrate their point.
Oh, I love a good example. Lay it on me.
Okay, so think about the concept of, say, speaking Finnish. A parrot could potentially mimic Finnish words, right?
Yeah.
But it wouldn't truly be speaking the language. It lacks the underlying understanding of the grammar, the context.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Similarly, you and I, we have the physical capacity to make sounds with our mouths, but that doesn't mean we can just spontaneously speak Finnish. We might have the potential, but we lack the learned ability. And this essay argues that time travel might work in a similar way.
So you're saying that our aspiring time traveler might be able to pull the trigger, metaphorically speaking, but the act itself is inherently impossible because it contradicts their very existence.
Exactly. It's not just about physical ability, but about logical possibility within the framework of cause and effect. Your existence in the present is, in a way, proof that your grandfather wasn't met with an untimely end.
So it's like the universe itself has safeguards in place to make sure a timeline can't unravel just because someone invents a time machine. But that begs the question, does that mean time travel is completely off the table, or is there a loophole somewhere in the fabric of reality? That is the question, isn't it? It's like, okay, so the universe is basically saying, nice try, but you can't just erase yourself from existence. But does that mean time travel is a dead end? Or is there a way around this whole paradoxical roadblock?
Well, the essay does offer up one pretty mind-bending possibility.
Oh, okay, I'm listening.
The concept of branching timelines.
Branching timelines, huh? All right, you've got my attention. Tell me more about these branching timelines.
So picture this. Imagine time, not as the straight line, but more like a tree with, multiple branches.
Okay, I think I'm getting a visual here.
And every decision, every single action, it has this potential to create a new branch, a whole new timeline where that specific outcome plays out.
So in one branch, our hypothetical time traveler, he loses his nerve, the grandfather breathes a sigh of relief, and history continues as we know it.
Mhm.
But then, In another branch.
In another branch, yeah, the attempt succeeds, and boom, completely different timeline. One where presumably our would-be assassin was never even born.
It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books, but on a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so we're not talking about a single fixed timeline then, but this, like, ever-expanding multiverse of possibilities. Every path branching out, creating infinite realities. And it's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it. But you know what I find really fascinating? It's how these fiction excerpts you brought, they take a slightly different approach. They're not so concerned with the, like, theoretical nuts and bolts of time travel paradoxes, you know? They're all about the human drama, the emotional and societal impacts of these what-if scenarios.
Absolutely. Fiction gives us that freedom to engage with the idea of time travel on a more, I guess you could say, visceral level. It's less about the mechanics of actually getting from point A to point B in time, and more about the emotional core of these extraordinary journeys.
Well, and speaking of journeys, let's talk about that excerpt from, it seems to be, a Spanish sci-fi novel. The one with the telepaths and the mysterious Melopone and technology that lets people communicate with the deceased. That one's giving me some serious Black Mirror vibes, I'm not going to lie. What's the deal with that one?
Oh, yeah. That excerpt really dives into some deep stuff. Questions about, the nature of consciousness, the ethics of interacting with the dead, and how technology can be used for good, but also has this potential for manipulation.
And speaking of manipulation, there's that scene where the character is, communicating with his deceased wife, and it just feels off somehow. Like he's clinging to something that isn't really there.
That's true.
Both heartbreaking and a little creepy at the same time.
Right. And then you've got Melopone lurking in the background, pulling the strings, but we don't know why.
Yeah, exactly. Makes you wonder, is this genuine communication with the afterlife or some kind of technologically induced illusion designed to exploit people's grief?
For sure. It's definitely a cautionary tale about the potential pitfalls of advanced technology, especially when it comes to matters of life and death.
Makes you think, that's for sure. And since we're talking cautionary tales, we can't forget about the post-apocalyptic excerpt. Angels, demons, monsters. Talk about a far cry from the charming nostalgia of Hill Valley. What stood out to you about that one?
Well, it definitely highlights how time travel isn't always a one-way ticket to some utopian future. It can lead to worlds ravaged by conflict where just surviving each day is a struggle.
And you've got to admire the protagonist, though. I mean, battling creatures, navigating these shifting alliances, all while trying to figure out how to prevent the apocalypse in the first place. She's a total badass.
Oh, absolutely. She's a great example of resilience, showing us that even in the darkest of timelines, even when you're facing impossible odds, the human spirit can still find a way.
It's like, even in a world overrun by monsters and demons, it's often the choices made by us, by ordinary people, that really determine the fate of humanity.
Exactly. Which brings us to our final fictional stop on this little deep dive.
Oh yeah, you're talking about the excerpt that I think is describing H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, right?
The one and only.
Ah, the Eloi and Morlocks. You can't really talk about classic sci-fi explorations of time without bringing them up. It's iconic. So what was it about this particular passage that stood out to you?
Well, Wells was a master at using these speculative stories to hold a mirror up to society. And this excerpt is a prime example. He creates this future where humanity has split into these two distinct species. You've got the childlike Eloi living above ground in this state of blissful ignorance, and then you've got the Morlocks toiling away underground in the darkness. But as the time traveler soon discovers, appearances can be deceiving.
And it's that gradual reveal that gets me every time. The time traveler slowly piecing together the truth about the Eloi and the Morlocks, how their existence is intertwined, and the disturbing reality of their relationship.
It's both fascinating and deeply unsettling, right?
Absolutely. But it makes you think, whoa, progress isn't always a straight line. And sometimes, even the most idyllic-seeming futures can have these dark, underlying truths.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, hey, be careful what you wish for, because utopia, yeah, that often comes with a hidden cost. But even with those darker themes, the time machine just sparks this, I don't know, this sense of wonder, that feeling of, man, what if I could just peek into the future, even if it's a future I wouldn't actually want to live in?
It's that very human desire for knowledge, isn't it? Even if that knowledge might not be so pleasant. This drive to know, where are we headed? What's the end point of all of this?
Even if the answer might freak us out a little.
Exactly.
You know, it's like that old saying, curiosity killed the cat.
But satisfaction brought it back.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's kind of what these time travel stories do. They give us this intellectual and emotional satisfaction, like letting us grapple with these huge questions about free will and causality, the very nature of reality. all within the safe space of a good story.
They give us this playground to explore the full spectrum of what ifs, the whimsical, the terrifying, and maybe through that exploration, we gain a new appreciation for how complex our present moment actually is.
You know, what's interesting is I think about all these different excerpts we've discussed, the paradoxes, the branching timelines, even those cautionary tales. It strikes me that time travel isn't just about the past or the future. It's really about understanding how it's all connected, the whole tapestry of time.
That's a really great point. It's like looking at a tapestry, but from the back. You're seeing those individual threads, how they're woven together, each one contributing to this larger pattern. And that's what these time travel narratives do. They give us that same perspective, helping us see how our actions, our choices, the consequences, they're all intertwined, woven together.
And maybe by understanding how those threads are woven together, we can start to better understand the tapestry itself, the vast, mind-boggling tapestry of time and existence.
Well, we've journeyed through time travel, murder, and a whole lot of mayhem in this deep dive. As we wrap things up, what's one final thought, one lingering question you'd like to leave our listeners with? Here's a thought to ponder. What if, and I know this is a big what if, all these different scenarios, all these seemingly impossible variations on time travel, what if they could all coexist within a single incredibly complex model of the universe? What would that tell us about the very nature of reality itself? What would it say about the potential for vastness, for strangeness, for things we haven't even begun to imagine?
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? To
Yeah.
consider that the universe might be far grander, far stranger, and filled with more possibilities than we could ever truly grasp.
And maybe that's the most alluring possibility of all.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.